What is up, everyone? Welcome to A Sum of Two Buses. Wait, hold on a second. Yes, that is way better. I should have done that way earlier. Those things look terrible. Anyways, today we're going to be talking about everything drums. Yes, we're here. Crowd favorite. I personally believe it's one of the biggest challenges we have in the live realm. Why are drums so challenging? Well, what other instrument do you know that has 12 or more mics on it that has to sound and feel like one instrument? Well, drums are definitely one of those challenges. Drums can be tough for numerous reasons. First off, it's definitely one of the most dynamic instruments out there. And with the digital world being clean from a harmonic standpoint, this can make our job a little bit more challenging to get that record sound and impact. Second, even though technology has ramped up by giving us a lot of options to process drums, we still don't have the same advantages as the studio cats because the mics on our drums are completely open in a very large set of studio monitors, also known as a PA. Third, our studio monitors / PA is firing into a different acoustic environment every night. Lucky us. Fourth, we may not even get the same studio monitors / PA every night. It may be a PA du jour tour. Oh, and if we didn't think those challenges weren't enough, we generally have to do our job in a fraction of the time it takes to get drum sounds in the studio. Most times we don't even get time. So yeah, there's a couple challenges. Sounds like you're complaining. Ha! I assure you I'm not. I just want to illustrate why I think our drum sounds have become more of a demonstration of our skills as engineers. It's just not that easy to mix them, let alone getting a great balance of drums in your mix. Today's audio demonstration will be You Should See Me in a Crown from one of the 3 shows Billy got to do this year. Let's start by saying I am very lucky to have such a great drummer to work with that is not only incredibly consistent, but also has a great sense of space and time. I'm talking about you, Andrew Marshall. Now, any engineer that has had a house gig with venue drums knows that you could have those drums completely dialed in with one drummer, and the next drummer comes up to the exact same drums with the exact same mic placement with the exact same channel settings, and it can sound totally terrible. Basically what I'm saying is there's no great drum sound without a great drummer. There's also a beautiful man in the shadows that takes care of Andrew's drums and really knows consistency with tuning. Mike Porman is really good at getting those drums to the same place every night by measuring the frequency of the drum's fundamental, which I know plays a huge part in making my life way easier than it should be. So let's get started by talking about mics and mic placement. For this show, I'm using a Shure Beta 91A on kick-in, Shure Beta 57 on main snare top, Sennheiser 604 on main snare bottom, SEV7X on side snare top, Shure KSM 137 on hi-hat, SEV Beats on both rack tom and floor tom 1, SEV Kick on floor tom 2, and Shure KSM 137s on overheads. Now on to placement. Our kick mic is placed directly on the drum pillow in the middle of the drum. As for shells, I generally try to treat them somewhat similar to a speaker. Depends on the drummer, of course, but with Andrew, I feel like I get more stick attack from aiming at the center of the drum right here. Now, if I feel like I want more body or more shell, I will tend to tilt the mic farther into the drum, usually aiming at the center point between the center of the drum and the rim. Now that we have some options about where to point the mic, let's talk about the distance away from the drum. For me, consistency is always key. Once a tour is in motion, I always want to make sure every mic is in the exact same place every night. So I tend to pay very close attention to where I aim the mic, how far into the drum the mic is, and how far away from the rim the mic is. For referencing how far the mic is into the drum, you can usually use things like the grill for a visual representation, like visually aligning the center point of a grill to the rim. So here's our really bad drawing of a mic. There's our center point. Visual components to the mic, such as the center point of the grill, can give you an indicator of how far into the drum you are. For referencing the mic's distance from the rim, it could be as easy as using your fingers. Usually I place a mic's capsule anywhere from 2 or 3 fingers away from the drum. Why does that matter? Well, proximity from the drum can change how the sound hits the mic. Now to overheads. This is extremely important to me. I am a huge fan of overheads. We live sound engineers don't have super cool squashed room mics to blend in to our drum sound. Our overheads usually end up being the only ambient mics we have to add some glue and depth to our drums. Here are a couple things I do with overheads. First, I start with finding a distance from the center of the main snare to the capsule of each overhead. Once I find a distance I like, I cut a piece of tie line for a reference for that distance. That way I can make sure my overheads are always at the same distance from my main snare. Making sure your overheads are always the same distance from your main snare can really help by keeping the drum image properly centered. Doing this can also retain the same polarity relationships between your overheads and your snare mic. How do you find the distance you like for overheads? Well, you could totally use your ears. But I actually started doing something a little different early on in my career by trying different distances based on the length of certain frequencies. My first idea was to use the length of 160 Hz waveform, which for that tour made sense. Then I decided to go an octave above so I could grab 250 Hz at the full cycle, which is around 54 inches. And this happens to be a frequency range I cut in my direct mics. The idea is that the sound wave from the center completes one full cycle. I also found settling on 250 Hz not only helped the main snare and the things that I cut in the main snare, but also helped out the rack and floor toms, and it added something to the kick. So for me, this frequency ended up being a great center point for both my overheads. Once you have your distance, be sure to check your polarity against your overheads and your close mics. When that is all sorted and your distance is determined, play around with the placement of each overhead to find the best location for picking up the cymbals. Then be sure to take note, that way you can recreate it every night. For this show and demonstration, I was using the DLive's new 32-bit prime preamps for all the drum mics. Alright, so far we've talked mics, placement, and preamps. So let's take a moment to see what my groups are doing. In this show, I have two drum groups. One is my all drum bus, which has all the mics on the acoustic drum kit, including cymbals. The second bus is a parallel compressed bus that only has the shells. And when I say shells, I mean kick, both snares, and all the toms. Let's take a look over the wave inserts across both these buses. It looks like I have NLS on both buses, followed by an SSL comp on the main, and after the SSL comp I have a PwigTech EQ at the end of that. As you can see, I'm pushing a little bit of air on both the top and the bottom. Let's move over to the parallel bus. I have the NLS channel on the drum parallel bus set to mic input. That way I could crunch up the sound a little bit. Following that, I have another PwigTech EQ pushing some 10K into this opto compressor, which is my parallel comp. What's parallel compression? I should have figured you'd ask that. Parallel compression is taking the duplicate of that source, compressing it with reckless abandonment, and blending that in with the other source, which is typically uncompressed, creating depth and excitement without destroying your transient information and impact. Most of the time, I've always defaulted to compressing first, then EQing next. But in the last couple years, I've been playing with ways to EQ into parallel compression to reshape transients. I'll explain. It came to me when I was mixing a tune for somebody, and the kick that they had wasn't the kick sound they wanted. They wanted more impact at 60 Hz. So I had this idea of using an EQ to bump up at 60 at somewhat of a narrow Q. Then I used a limiter after that to clip off just a little bit of that transient I created with the EQ, thus in a way providing a little bit more impact at that desired frequency. These days, I have a similar approach to my parallel compressed drum channels. I like to boost certain top and bottom frequencies, then I like to hit them down with a fast attack and a somewhat fast to medium release, kind of in a way trying to achieve what I was doing with the limiter. Okay, cool. Lastly, we're going to jump back to episode 1, when we talked about my main bus processing. As a reminder, I have this EQ going over my entire mix, and note that it's after my stereo bus compression. I'm bringing this up now so we all fully know what bus processing I have going on before we get to our input channels. So now let's go ahead and check out our input channels. EQ into comp. EQ into comp for parallel compressed main snare. There's no rack tom on this, so let's move on to the floor tom. Floor tom 2. All right, let's hear our toms in the mix. All right, overheads. Let's hear our groups. All right, here's our drum mix with our effects. All right, let's hear our mix. Sweet, right? Let's talk effects. For Billie's show, all my effects are internal within the DLive. I have two effects engines set up for drums. I have a drum verb that automates based on the needs of the song, and I have a drum room that stays static for the show. For the automating reverb on this song, I have set up as a snare plate. Another thing I love doing with drum effects is instead of sending it to the main left-right mix, I like to send the drum effects returns into the drum buses themselves. Doing it this way can really add some cool pumping artifacts to both the drums and the effects. And it could also feel like it adds another level of glue to your drum mix. Last note for the effects. I'm a huge fan of the Abbey Road's trick of EQing your send into your effects engines. I'm also guilty of EQing the reverb returns of my effects as well, but there's definitely a magic to being able to control the sound hitting your effects processors. Well, there you have it. As engineers, we know that there's numerous ways to get to the same destination. And this was my humble approach to my live drum sound for Billie. Be sure to tune in next episode when we talk about multi-band dynamics, specifically the Dyne 8 in the DLive and the F6 in Waves. Well, that's it for this episode of A Sum of Two Buses. If you dug it, please like, please share, and please subscribe. Until next time, take care and be safe.